Hi everyone, thanks for being with me on the Tony Tompkins Show, where facts matter and therefore obviously you matter. There's a whole host of stuff that we need to talk about, and where I'm going to go with this will depend upon you and the comments that you make in the comment section, because today is your day, an opportunity for the community to get together and talk about matters that matter. And so I'm going to start a little bit about talking about a post I did yesterday with a wonderful individual by the name of Philip Hazel. And I suggest that as many of you, if you can, have a look at that particular post, because it was an interview with someone who's suffering from early onset dementia. And he talked a little bit about how he's managed that, how he's dealing with it in his life. And he certainly has some tremendous suggestions in terms of how, if you are facing with this problem, or if others that you know are facing with dementia, what you can best do to manage it. It's a fabulous interview, and I suggest that as many people as you can watch it and share it. And I do need to say before I carry on, could you please subscribe to my channel, ring the bell for further notifications. But nevertheless, that's life. I'm sure you will subscribe to the channel and ring the bell for further notifications. There we go. And ring the bell for further notifications, because a lot of what I say is maybe controversial, and maybe it's something that you will agree with or disagree with. And I certainly enjoy the comments that you make as well, good or bad. It's about people having an opportunity to talk about the things that actually matter to them. So I'm going to start today by talking about, or at least having a discussion around what's happening in relation to the protesters, or the planned protests in Australia on the weekend. And one of the questions I've been asking myself and others is whether or not these protests are appropriate. Firstly, they were planning to be some impromptu protests today, given it's the anniversary of January the 7th, 2023. And I thought initially, and I guess I still believe that the protests are inappropriate on this particular day. We should be protesting what's happening in Gaza almost every day, because of the 62,000 people that have been killed, slaughtered, murdered by the IDF. Women and children killed indiscriminately, because it is the IDF's and Israel's, I guess, idea, their core idea, that the country, the Middle East, should be eradicated from Palestinians, period, end of story, which explains the genocide that has been Gaza. So should we have had protests today? I don't think that would have been appropriate. But protests on the weekend, certainly. And one of the issues I think that's primary importance here is that there's a number of people who are saying, well, perhaps we shouldn't have these protesters at all, because they are supporting Palestine, which Palestinians automatically means that they are anti-Jewish. And we need to be clear about where we sit in relation to that. Because you support a group of people who are being slaughtered in another part of the world doesn't necessarily mean that you're anti-Semitic. In fact, what it does mean is that you're humanitarian. You're actually supporting the human social justice issues in relation to what's happening with those people in Gaza. And it's important for us to continue to focus on that, not to be blurred out by what the right wing are saying in particular. It was particularly interesting today. I've watched Question Time, and I watch Question Time, so you don't have to. And at the beginning of Question Time, they were commemorating what had happened on, I don't know if commemorating is the right word, they were remembering what happened on October the 7th, 2023. And Albanese, I thought, gave a wonderful speech about how Hamas were a terrible organisation, that it was an horrific event, most horrific event since World War II and the Holocaust, and everybody had to agree with him. But then Susan Lee decides to stand up and talk about not just those issues, how horrific it was and so forth, but started to blame, so turned it into this anti-Semitic conversation, blaming the government for the rise in anti-Semitism in Australia. Now, there is no disputing the fact that anti-Semitism in Australia has risen by 339% since October the 7th, 23. And it's a concern that it's risen that much. The question that we really need to be asking was a number of questions. Number one, what is it that a government can do in order to confront anti-Semitism? Number two, do we need to look at anti-Semitism as being a state of mind that has always been present? It has just taken this one event for it to rise to the surface and for us to be seen. And number three is, if that is the case, if it has only sat there as some sort of dormant thought that people have had around Jewish people, and it now is, what could we possibly have done to prevent it? And I guess the fourth thing is, how do we control the behaviour of 20 plus million people in a country which is independent in thought, supposedly, independent in action to a degree, providing you don't break the law, and which is about burying or suppressing those terrible, hateful thoughts that people have. I don't know whether it's at all possible, whether there's any government on the face of this earth, unless you were an autocratic regime whereby you simply locked people up for what you thought they may be doing or a different perspective that they might have. So, for example, if you find that people are anti-Semitic in nature, you've either read seen a TikTok, read an X post or something on YouTube that indicates through social media that they sit on that side of politics, an authoritarian organisation would arrest them, lock them up, silence them. So people would learn to know that if you had held those views, any of those views, then you might find yourself incarcerated. That is not the way Australia works. And I don't know, it was hard for me to understand what Susan Lee was trying to tell the Albanese government, what they should have done in order to limit. So they've got Gillian Siegel, they've got she did her report on it. They've put in hate legislation. The government has done everything that one could do to eliminate hate speech when it becomes apparent and obvious, short of locking people up for what they post. In the UK, I think they've taken it a little bit further. Correct me if I'm wrong, if somebody knows anything more about the UK. But in the UK, what they've done is they've actually found people that have posted stuff on TikTok, well, I think it was on X, that they believed was enticing hate. And as a result, some of those people have been locked up. So the other question that sits around this is, where does freedom of speech sit? To what extent is our freedom of speech actually limited according to the consequences that may occur from making statements that we believe in but which are deemed inappropriate or hateful? Where is the line? Who draws that line? And who acts upon implementing that line? Well, I guess the law has to kind of decide all of that. But then there is this protest on the weekend. And the right wing, in particular, are now claiming that it should not be held. So we now have this polarised view around the right to protest in Australia. And if you protest, that is, if you're protesting against what's happening in Gaza, so you're pro-Palestinian, in other words, automatically you are being labelled as being extreme, leftist, and if we're in the United States, and this hasn't happened necessarily here, but I can see it coming, you'd be labelled as Antifa, the organisation that doesn't actually exist. So, where do we stand in relation to that? Well, there's an article in the Sydney Morning Herald that I think is worth noting, whereby the court has been involved in all of this. So New South Wales Top Court will decide whether to grant a prohibition order over a planned pro-Palestinian protest at the Sydney Harper House on Sunday as Jewish leaders back police in opposing the rally. And now the issue around that too is that the police are arguing that that public safety is an issue because where you've got very narrow exit and entry points, there could be a crowd crush. So, and that is actually, and I can understand that from the Sydney Harbour perspective and the government's and the police perspective, and that it would be a dangerous place if you've got 100,000 people, as opposed to the Sydney Harbour Bridge, which means people can kind of go both ways. The other point, apparently, according to the police, is that if you have to reverse a crowd, you have to be able to, and they have to move quickly, is there the space to be able to do that? So that's a primary concern as well. So I understand all of that, but what they've done is the protesters have been given alternative routes. So it may turn out that it may not be the Sydney Harbour, it may not be the Opera House, but it might be an alternative place for them. So the question that I'm asking you today, should we ban all protests where where it is estimated there will be over a certain number of people? And how do you know that in the first place? There are certain behaviours which are inappropriate in protests. So the one that was held a couple of years ago at the Sydney Opera House, where people asked, "Where are the Jews?" Should those people have been arrested for saying that? It is anti-Semitic, I agree. It is wrong. Should those people have been arrested for saying that? If you're going to hold up an ISIS flag, should you be arrested for holding such flag? If you hold up a Palestinian flag, should be arrested for that? Or if you're holding up a poster with a picture of Khomeini, should you be arrested for that as well? So there's a lot of issues, I think. And what happens if the police decide to, the rally at Sydney Harbour Bridge, according to the police, where there were over 100,000 people perhaps participated in that rally, it was peaceful. It was peaceful. So where were these Antifa people stirring things up? And what did it matter that someone held a poster of their dear leader or that they carried Palestinian flags or an ISIS flag? At the end of the day, why did that matter? And why did it matter to those on the right of politics? What was it telling them that they didn't like? And what is their fear? That's the other question I need to ask. What is the fear that they have by restricting the freedom to speech? Because it just seems to me that they don't like any conversation that anybody's having that is different to a conversation they believe that should be had. So when we're talking about Palestinians, the other interesting thing for me also is that when you watch stations like Sky News and other right-wing outlets, they're always talking about what happened on October the 7th. And as shameful as it is, and it's atrocious, the loss of life and the taking of prisoners, in effect, hostages, is horrible. We can say that as much as we like. And, believe me, it is horrible, should never have happened. Hamas are responsible. We can say that as much as we like. Does it mitigate against what happened on October the 8th and every day thereafter? I don't think it does. And I know that there's been some reports now that in the United States in particular, the support for what Israel was doing in Gaza was really high 12 months ago. It's now dropped down to about 20%. So the world has turned against them. And folks, there is this other argument also. Did Albanese and the other 147 countries do the right thing by acknowledging and recognising a Palestinian state? And did that have any effect on the outcome. Well, there are a number of issues around that. Number one is they did it far too late. They should have done it 18 months ago when they could see the horrors that were happening in that country. And there were times, a long time ago, in the beginning of that conflict, whereby water was limited, food was prohibited, electricity was limited and banned, and they could see that the IDF were destroying the infrastructure as little as it was in Gaza, and a lot of that infrastructure depended on Israel. So at that early stage, when they bombed a hospital to start with, and women and children and patients were killed, surely that was the time when we all should have turned around and said, enough is enough. But we didn't. We stood on our hands, we waited to see how the rest of the world was going to respond, and then we chose to do something about it at a time when the devastation had already occurred. So for me, it is, could we have done something about it earlier? At what point, if all the countries in the world, or at least 3/4 of them, got together and said enough is enough, whether that would have changed the behaviour of Israel and its military? Don't know. We will never know now because it's all happened, and maybe one could argue it's far too late. Too many lives have died. And one of the scary things is that some of the estimates are that given that they still haven't cleared the rubble, that there could be well over 100,000 people killed in this conflict. We can't equate that, and should never equate that, to the 1,200 people that were killed and those taken hostages and those that have died at the hands of Hamas. But if you look at proportionality, the proportion of the conflict devastated against Gaza and its people compared to what Hamas did on October the 7th, it's just so out of proportion that, as I say, at some point, someone should have taken note and should have done something earlier. And I think it's shameful that right now the Liberal Party are busily having a conversation about this in Question Time, where they are blaming the government for the behaviour of people who are acting as anti-Semites. It's shameful. That is shameful. Because, believe me, the Liberal Party and the National Party were pretty useless while they were in power. And anti-Semitism was always there. So why didn't they source it out at the beginning? When they were in power for 9 years, why didn't they do something about anti-Semitism? Why isn't it that we do something about Islamophobia? There was a post, which I haven't got in front of me. I lost it actually the other day for varying reasons, but it was really about, Islamophobia has increased at the same rate as anti-Semitism has. But we don't tend to have the discussion around Islamophobia. Why is that? Is it because in our community, Muslims don't matter, but if you have a Jewish belief, it does? Is it because the Jewish lobby and the Association of Juries, are more powerful and more influential than the Muslim community? Is it because we relate, even though Jews are not a Christian belief, because we relate more to Christianity, I guess, does that in itself make them more significant? Are they more important because they're Jewish, as opposed to if you're Muslim? It's interesting, isn't it? So these are questions I'm asking. It's all your opportunity to discuss them, and later on I'll get to some of your responses as well, and I'll go through those and we'll talk about them accordingly. Can I just remind you, please subscribe to my channel, ring the bell for further notifications. It doesn't cost you anything. Please do that. I really do appreciate it. It helps my retirement program. And to carry on from where I was, before I clearly got sidetracked myself, New South Wales Police, can I bring this up? I think I can. Wrong one. New South Wales Police lodged an urgent application last week in the Supreme Court seeking a prohibition order over the protest. Despite its name, the order would not result in the protest being banned outright, but it would expose protesters to a wider range of potential criminal sanctions, including for obstructing traffic. So, fair enough, if you obstruct traffic. So what does that mean? Does that mean then that if you drive a car and it crosses the traffic and prevents traffic from coming through, does that mean you're obstructing? If there's 1,000 people that are all walking on a road they're not supposed to be walking on, is that obstructing traffic? I guess so. Are they going to arrest 1,000 people? Don't know. If you throw things in the front of traffic, I would assume automatically that if you've been approved to hold the rally, then those roads would be cleared by the police. That would be my view. So what is obstructing? So if obstructing traffic, what are the other criminal sanctions that they plan to implement? Doesn't know. So Supreme Court Justice Ian, I'll keep going with the wrong one. The Supreme Court Justice Ian Harrison made orders on Tuesday, paving the way for the state's top court, the Court of Appeal, to hear the police application on Wednesday. Sydney barrister James Emmett SC, acting for New South Wales Police, has asked the court to make an order removing the matter from the Supreme Court and sending it to the Court of Appeal on a number of bases, including the urgency of the hearing and the legal arguments involved. This was not opposed by protest organisers from the Palestinian Action Group. So, among the issues to be resolved are the scope of the legal immunities available to participants in an authorised public assembly under the State Summary Offences Act, and how that interacts with Opera House legislation banning public demonstrations on the premises. The protest would be authorised unless the prohibition order was made. Issues related to the Commonwealth Constitution will be canvassed. Harrison directed the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies to file written submissions before Wednesday's hearing on their application to intervene in the proceedings to make submissions opposing the rally. So we have two issues here, and these are worth noting, incidentally. Number one is whether you use the Opera House. I personally don't believe that's a good idea, particularly if you're going to have 50 to 100,000 people turn up, because it's just not big enough, and for access and people crushing and all those sort of reasons is one. And the other one is that why is the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies writing a submission? Therefore they're objecting to the protests themselves. And what is their reason for suggesting that they are opposing these particular rallies? And emphasising the urgency of the hearing, Harrison said, "You'd have to live in a vacuum not to be aware of the significant public importance of these proceedings to all members of the community." And I think that's an interesting note. So it's this one here. That you'd have to live in a vacuum not to be aware of the significant public importance of these proceedings to all members of the community. So he's taking, the Jewish side, whatever their arguments are, the Palestinian and the Palestinian Action Group and their side. So because it is an important issue for them. He said decision on one way or the other was required well in advance of Sunday. And my question also is, does this mean that they could hold a rally elsewhere? This is about the Sydney Opera House, but doesn't mean they could hold a rally in another place. This is the question. Former Greens candidate Hannah Thompson, who was injured by a police officer in June during an anti-Israel protest, joined pro-Palestinian protesters outside the Supreme Court on Sydney during the hearing. On Friday, New South Wales Police met with the protest organisers, who submitted a formal notice to hold the march through the CBD to the Opera House on Sunday to mark 2 years of genocide of the Palestinian people following the Hamas attack. Right, fair enough. Okay. So New South Wales Premier Chris Harris criticised a separate pro-Palestinian demonstration, said, oh, this is an issue. So New South Wales Premier Chris Minns criticised a separate pro-Palestinian demonstration set to occur in Western Sydney on Tuesday evening. That's right, and that was the one that was supposed to be held tonight, and that's the one that I would disagree with. So, what do you all think about that? Is it an issue that we should be concerned about? And should they hold the rally over the this coming weekend? And also remember that I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't there an Australia Day, or Australia First, or whatever they call it, Mass Immigration Australia Day, or Mass Immigration Protest on the 12th, which is Sunday. So maybe there'll be lots of demonstrations all over the place as a result of all of that. So there's this other interesting article. So please make your comments. I'll just zap through some of them. Someone suggested drop me a super chat. I tell you what, folks, I don't focus on. I appreciate it, so I'm not discounting it. If you want to drop me a super chat, please feel free to do so. I'll be grateful. But I don't advertise or promote that sort of stuff. But JGB, thanks very much. I do appreciate that. Someone says here, and I'll just pop it up. Religion has a lot to answer for. I tell you what, Dee, if you're on this discussion, which I think you are, I think you'd probably agree with that. My wife is Deirdre, and you see her on the list. She often argues that religion certainly has a problem with all of this. And let's face it. I said to her recently, I said, look, if there weren't religions, that's an interesting notion. How about this for something dystopian? If there were no religions, what would we choose to believe in? And let's say we just choose to take a humanitarian approach, which is the approach I tend to take because I'm an atheist. So if we just took an approach which said we should believe in we're all equal, so equality. We should be fair and reasonable, and we should ensure that everybody in our community is cared for. No matter who you are, no matter what your background is, we should have a universal basic income, for example, is something I would advocate for. We should make sure that no matter, if you come from a minority group, that you should be heard, you should be listened to, you should be understood. If you're part of an LGBTQI plus community, then you should be heard and understood about the issues that matter to you. You should not be discounted. That we should stop putting up these rigid versions of what we believe is right or wrong. It's like I've said many times that I'd like to think that people could come onto my channel and have a discussion. I don't call it a debate, but we certainly could have a discussion about things that matter to you, whether you're right wing or left wing. There's a guy actually on, which I might bring up next. So there's a guy who is involved with Turning Point Australia, and I'm going to talk about this in just a moment, so stay tuned. So Turning Point Australia, in relation to having a group of Turning Point Australia here in Adelaide in South Australia. And I'm going to talk about him in just a moment. But, I think, we should have open debates, right? I'm always have been interested in why people think what they think. What informs them about those beliefs? Where do those beliefs come from? And then I start to wonder about how entrenched are those beliefs. I was watching a video last night by a young woman who was a Mormon, and she was entrenched in the MAGA movement. And she talked about, and it was really interesting, she talked about how she became so entrenched and indoctrinated. And she referred to it as being brainwashed. And and one could argue, I guess, that people that sit on the progressive side of politics, my side of politics, may find that may believe that we're brainwashed. But I can tell you, as somebody that was extremely right wing back in the 70s and 80s, that my transition from the extreme right to being a progressive has been significant, primarily because I haven't been brainwashed. I simply went to university and discovered that there were different views of the world than the one I grew up with. Right? It wasn't my parents' fault necessarily, but it wasn't until I was in my late 30s that I went back to university. So I went to university, period. So, it isn't about being indoctrinated necessarily. I think if you're... Now, tell me if I'm wrong. If you're on the left, are you just as likely to be indoctrinated? I don't think you are. I think that the beauty about being on the left of politics is that we appreciate independent thought. And we like to take the ideas that come our way, we like to balance them out. We like to say, okay, that thought I agree with, that one I disagree with. That one sits with whatever I think my values are, and that one doesn't. That one creates conflict for those people that are vulnerable, and this other idea helps to resolve those conflicts so that people who are vulnerable don't have to suffer the consequences of their vulnerability. So, yet if you're sitting on the right wing and you're looking and listening to people like some of these people that we've got here in Australia, like Antic, Babbitt, and Pauline Hanson, and you start to look at the way they articulate their perspectives, you think, they're morons. They are. It's like looking at Donald Trump and thinking, well, how could any possibly... You have to be brainwashed. You have to be brainwashed, psychotic, have psychosis, or not be an extreme narcissist in order to even agree with some of the things that they say. That for some reason, Donald Trump is God. What sort of person would possibly ever believe that? But people do. That he's sent from God to save the world. Holy Moses. So I'll take us to this bit, which is it's called "The Traditions of Judaism and Islam Have Been Abused to Become Blueprints of War." A really interesting article, and it's worth I think diving into. It feels surreal to finally write these words, yet after 2 horrific years, a war that has consumed every soul in this land and may finally be ended. And this writer is Jewish, so we need to remember that. When I finally see the return of the remaining hostages, it will feel like I'm witnessing a modern-day miracle. I imagine Matan Zanguka in the arms of his lines of Mother Ineve, whose relentless, agonising 2-year campaign has fuelled a mass movement against the government and for the hostages' release, mobilising thousands of Israelis every Saturday night. When a deal is finally signed, I long to see hundreds of thousands of Palestinians finally packing up their lives in the sweltering tents of Al-Mawasa, ready to return to the ruins of their homes in the north of Gaza. I envision them walking the Al-Rashid road home, their long march taking them along the shores of the Mediterranean Sea that binds us all. For 2 years, the people of Gaza have endured relentless suffering, a constant cycle of mourning, loss and death. Life there has seemingly frozen, each day bringing new wounds, and each night a heavier fear. The constant rhythm of bombardments and explosions from Rafah to Beit Hanun has left the people of Gaza falling asleep to the sound of shells and waking to the desperate cries of those searching for the missing in the debris. Everything I want for my people, peace, talking about the Jewish people. Everything I want for my people, peace, freedom, security, I also want for them. I think that's an amazing bit of writing. And it's a great article, and if you've got a chance, you can look it up in the Sydney Morning Herald, and it's called "The Traditions of Judaism and Islam Have Been Abused to Become Blueprints of War." And that is true from both sides. So it's a journalist, Ite Fletcher is his name. So, and I think it's important to understand that there are lots of people who sit on either side of this conflict, who are, there'd be people, I think, in Palestine, in Gaza, who were horrified at what happened on October the 7th, who didn't agree with what Hamas did. Because at the end of the day, it was wrong, and it brought about the devastation of their own country. So there'd be people that would, the Palestinians, who would have been horrified by that. And there are many Jews all around the world who feel ashamed of what their homeland has done to Gaza. And I think it's, as I said before, it's way overdue for us to do something about it. Now, just going through your notes. Oh, thanks. I've got $5 from Hunenberg. Thank you. $2.99 from JGB. Thank you, guys. So Tom Jones is back. Okay. I think it's time for women to lead. Oh, come on! I've got to put that up. My wife will love this. Whoops, wrong one. Don't know why I do that. I think it's time for women to lead. Men can't seem to do it without violence. I actually, I was trying to think the other day, and that's a really good point. I was trying to think the other day of how many women leaders we have that were atrocious. Margaret Thatcher jumped into mind because of what happened in relation to the Falklands War. So some of us can remember that. But it's an interesting debate, isn't it? My experience, for what it's worth, is that women have this ability, I guess. It isn't that men haven't got this. I must stress that. But women tend to have an ability, I guess, to be more gentle. And there's this argument that I've had with my wife, I've had with others over the years, that women talk about their feelings more. Well, they don't. That's a myth, I can assure you, because I've done a lot of work in that particular area. And that we know that women use more words than men, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they talk about their feelings. I think both are pretty shitty, both males and females are doing that. Whether women would make... I tell you what, if you really want to know whether women are better at it than men, I think it's a... I'm trying to think of the right word. I don't think it really... It's an ambivalent type of statement. So I'm a bit ambivalent about it, I guess I'm saying, because, you have a look at who sits in Parliament, and I believe there should be 50-50 deal, 50 men, 50 women. But, do the men do a better job than women? Can men be as empathetic as we perceive women to be? Well, of course they can. Of course they can. Can women be as aggressive as men? So women will argue that they have to be more aggressive in order to break through the glass ceiling. Right? The question is, do they really? Is it simply because often women find themselves in a male's environment and they believe they have to work harder to break through that? That's probably true. But when we're talking about would women make better leaders, I'm not convinced that that's necessarily the case. Why is it that we believe that they would make better leaders? And the argument that was put forward by that comment, which is true, is that men have done a shitty job of it. So why not give women an opportunity to do so? And that's a reasonable argument as well. Let's test it. Let's elect more women. And I think we should elect more women. Should they... I was watching Annika Wells today, who's the Minister for Communication, who I think is fabulous. And then she was pitting up against Susan Lee, oddly enough, And Susan Lee, so they hammered in Question Time today. It was fascinating to watch. Susan Lee and her cohorts of crazy right-wing people decided that they were going to have a go at the communications minister because of the triple O debacle. So the failing of Optus to be able to maintain their system, and therefore triple O failing, and there have been 4 people that have been recorded have lost their lives as a result of that. And so the Liberal Party, because they've got nothing else, they've got no policy issues, so bugger it. So they decided to attack Annika Wells. And Annika, I think, was fabulous because she was strong, she was direct, she didn't take their bullshit. This is what I like, and maybe this is what women do better than men, I don't know. But she eyed Susan Lee and said, "This is what I believe. Why don't you, have you read the documents you're referring to, because this is actually what they say." And she held it to account, which I thought was rather brilliant. So what I guess I'm saying is that whether you're a woman or a man, it makes no difference, apart from the fact that women do have to seem to fight harder. I accept that, to get to the top, because us men try to want to hold them back. Because part of the issue is we as men feel intimidated by women who have power. And that's more of a problem than whether a woman would be a better leader than a man. That we hold them back because we're afraid, and that because we don't want to be told what to do by a woman, because many of us are just misogynist pricks. That's basically what it amounts to. So I do appreciate that response, and I've just lost it now because I've got so many stuff here. So I'd be interested to know what many of you think about that particular issue. But just want to go to this bit, and we'll start discussing this. First term Liberal MP Mary Aldrin has rebuked Rebel colleague Andrew Hastie for quitting his frontbench role and warning the party will return into a Victorian-style basket case if it continues to navel-gaze and let Labor off the hook. So here's us. Now we can have this conversation about where the Liberal Party is going, because I'm as confused around that as anybody. In Tuesday morning's Liberal Party room meeting in Canberra, Aldrin stood up and said she and other colleagues would lose their seats at the next election if the party did not unite, focus on its core strengths and turn the heat on the government. The new MP for the region, Victorian seat of Monash, clipped Hastie in her speech, saying that she disagreed with the way he handled his resignation, reflecting the sentiment of many of his colleagues, including some of his allies. This is how we become like the Victorians. And believe me, the Liberal Party federally don't want to become like the Liberal Party in Victoria, that is for sure. 3 MPs unable to publicly speak about the closed-door meeting quoted her as saying, "The Victorian Liberal division has been a basket case for years, having won a single election since 1996. It's a bit sad, really. Aldrin told colleagues she came to Canberra to fight Labor, not to feud internally. Hastie was sitting in the room but did not speak. It's rare for MPs to criticise colleagues in party room meetings. Opposition leader Susan Lee did not address the Hastie drama in her speech to the meeting. The opposition Dirty Linen was aired on Monday as this masthead, that's Sydney Morning Herald, revealed that Dutton, who led the heuristic election lost in May, was highly critical of Hastie's work ethic and policy development in his private submissions delivered to the party's election review in July. So what's that telling us? Is that Dutton, the potato man, dumped on Hastie in the review. So he put the wind up Hastie because he doesn't like him, and that obviously, maybe that has impacted Andrew Hastie to the point that Andrew Hastie said, well, I've had enough of this, I'm going to sit on the back bench for a bit, watch Susan Lee implode, the Liberal Party implode, then I'll come and I may do what I can to rescue them. Senior Liberals have called for leagues to stop at the party because the party should focus on policies, including resolving this position on emissions reduction. As Lee inches closer to compromise to retain net zero as a goal with a new economic caveat. Well, that didn't work at the last federal election, so I don't know what the hell they plan to cover now. So election reviewer and former Senator Nick Minchin, they dragged these guys out of the dungeons, it amazes me, who interviewed Dutton for the reviewer in July outside former New South Wales Minister Prue Goward, and alongside former New South Wales Minister Prue Goward, another dinosaur, confirmed they talked to Dutton about the party's defence policy and did not deny Dutton scrutinised Hastie's role as defence spokesman. The defence policy, announced late and with little detail, was criticised when it was released just 10 days before the election. So, anyway, so here we have, I guess the point is, here we have the Liberal Party desperately fighting amongst themselves to prove their degree of relevance. And the reality is, they are, from just watching Question Time today, I can assure you, they are no longer relevant. If the best they can do is attack Wells, the communications minister, for what the telcos did in relation to triple O outages, and expect her to have a magic wand that resolves all of that, is beyond me, because that is the best that the Liberal Party are capable of doing. So I'm just going through. I got $10 from Reed. Thank you very much. Hi Tony, thanks for showing the younger viewers like myself. I'm sure Reed, that's. I don't know whether you meant that as. Hi Tony, thanks for showing the younger viewers like myself how to think critically for themselves and filter through the right-wing media rubbish. Your content and knowledge. Well, thank you. I appreciate that, for what it's worth. So what else have we got here? Dutton was a disaster. Oh, I like this guy. I love this. So, no, wrong one. Get rid of that. Pop it again. Dutton was a disaster. And this, you got a picture of Susan Lee there. Oh, that's interesting. The title, her username is Tom Jones is back. Okie dokie. Pleased to hear that. What else have I got? All crap bets. Did anyone... Oh, yeah, this is worth noting. This is from D. I'll pop this one up. Did anyone see the Robo-Debt doco? A reminder of how bad Morrison Hotel were, bad and cruel. And we need to know, D, you might like to say this, the woman that was the secretary, whatever she was, in charge of the ministry, the Human Services Department, she was horrible. So if we want to come back to whether women would make better prime ministers or leaders than men, well, she's an example of just a horrible woman. So you know, I have my doubts. I think they're all just as bad as each other. And as I said before, women struggle to make it simply because the men try to stop them. Maybe holding a party, a few hundred mates from the Gaza open-air prison wasn't the best idea. Actually, can I put that up? I don't know what keeps doing that. I'll pop this. No, I can't get this one up for some reason. This one. Maybe I funnily enough thought of this some time ago, but I thought it was a bit rude to possibly raise it as an issue. But maybe holding a party a few hundred metres from the Gaza open-air prison wasn't the best idea. You know what would have happened? So that raises a really great point. So thanks for mentioning that, because one of the issues around all of that has been that that it has been touted, it has been suggested. Ironically, or relatively, or not know what the word is that Israel knew about the pending attack before it happened. So, if Israel did know, and look, this has come about, this is the Tony Tonkin theory here, so it means bugger all. But basically, Israel has some of the most sophisticated surveillance techniques in the world. They're like AI plus. So they're super knowledgeable. They've got all these companies in Israel that manufactures, churn out this shit and then send it over to other countries, including Ukraine, America, Europe. So they had all this information. They could track faces, right? And they could listen in on everybody's mobile in Gaza. Everybody's mobile was tracked. They could listen in. So do you mean to tell me that because of all of that technology, they did not know? So somehow the Palestinians and the Hamas were so clever that they organised this attack with, flying objects, flying in on kites and breaking through fences and all that sort of stuff. Do you think, and organising hundreds and hundreds of people in order to do it, do you think that they were so smart that they could do that without the Israelis knowing? Unlikely. So let's say they did. Let's say that Israel did know. And Israel also knew that there was this, that it was going to happen because there was this concert. This festival was happening. And so Israel allowed the festival to go on. Now this is bordering on conspiracy theories, so please bear with me. So let's just say Israel planned, or knew, I shouldn't say planned, knew that this was the rally, the concert rather, was going to take place, and that that Hamas were planning to break through the border because the rally was taking place and because it was so close, and that Israel thought, well, let them do it. We'll sacrifice 1,000 or so people, and we could start a war and get rid of those Palestinians, those bastards sitting on our back fence. So, is that possible? Is that possible? Because I think it is. And what would it tell you about the Israel government? Not Jewish people, not people living in Israel, not the citizens, but the IDF and Netanyahu. What would it tell you about them if that was the case? And how would the Israeli people feel if that came out, that they actually knew and sacrificed their own people for the sake of a war that would destroy the lives of some 60,000 people and wipe out everything that they owned? Wonder how the rest of it would feel about all of that. Because it's probable. It's probable. And I don't know how I got there, because I was talking about the Dutton thing and the election. So in this article it says here, Peter Dutton avoided direct criticism of his shadow minister in the course of his discussion with us. Minchin told him, we discussed inter alia, the defence policy and the policy formulation process generally. Dutton has not disputed this master's report despite being contacted. But so he agrees, I guess, on all of that. So there's this other one which I may or may not talk about. No, I won't. I'll keep that one for another day. So I just want to just come back to some kind of lots of comments. Thank you very much, folks, for your donations and stuff. Really appreciate it. Just a cup of coffee. Next cup of coffee I'll have, I'll think of you. Heidel Sausage and GHGB, thank you very much. They killed more Israelis themselves that day. Right. Okay. Look, thanks everybody for participating. I really appreciate it. I often don't. I try to go for about an hour when I do these. I just want to remind you to have a look at the one I put up yesterday on dementia. Want to do more of those. If you've got a story that you'd like to tell, or if you know somebody who's got a story that they would like to tell or could tell that is of interest, and it doesn't have to be someone important. I don't give a shit. In fact, probably less important the better. Someone who's just got an interesting life story about a struggle that they've had perhaps and a way they've overcome that, or how they're confronting certain issues in their lives. They're the stories I want to hear from, and I want to develop a playlist that just has those stories, just like Phil Hazel's story that I recorded yesterday. So please look that up, and please remember to subscribe to my channel. Ring the bell for further notifications. I really do appreciate it. In the meantime, just be safe.